All right. Hi, everybody. And I just have to make sure. Yes, it is recording. Okay. My name is Lindsay. Thank you for joining us. And I do understand this is being recorded. So for all of you who are watching it after the fact, I hope you find this interesting and I hope it generates lots of discussion and lots of questions. So I'm going to I am going to share my screen, and I do have a slide deck to run through, and I am very okay with being interrupted. So if you have any questions as we go, you can put them in the chat box, or you can unmute. I don't mind. But if chat is the way to do it, then by all means, please do, and I will try and answer as many as I can while I present. But I'm very okay with it being a conversation. You don't have to wait necessarily till the formal Q&A. But I am going to turn off my video while I present because we are, of course, on rural internet and don't have the greatest bandwidth, okay? So I will just stop my video and share my screen. That being said, though, if at any time, if there's an issue where you can't see something or it's not advancing or something like that, if somebody could unmute and just let me know. But if somebody can give me the verbal yes, you can see my screen there, then we'll get rolling here. Okay. So yes, here we go. Okay, so on the right, this is an early picture of solar grazing and our story of where we're at now. This is our fifth, the Ottawa Valley, just west of Ottawa. Okay. So Chris, who could not be here tonight, so he does apologize for that, but he is happy to answer any of your questions after the fact. And so just keep that in mind. He does plenty of the work on site, takes care of our flock. But we started farming together in 2016, and as you'll see in 2017 is when sort of all of this started. So I understand, or I believe you have had Ryan and Romy Schill from here in Ontario as well come and speak to you, and that is a picture of their beautiful sheep in their beautiful facility and their beautiful friends of ours. And Ryan and Romy sort of went the route that we considered, but didn't go, and that is high input, high maintenance. And part of the reason that we decided not to go that route was because of just how much infrastructure we would have to do on our existing land base. So we have a 100-acre farm. It is a farm that has been in Chris's family since the early 60s. It was a dairy, so we do have an old bank barn, small barn that we tried to do sort of an accelerated system of running, several lambing groups a year, just keeping them small, using, whatever we could to try and make the most out of our infrastructure. But when we penciled out what we would have to put in to actually turn it into a scalable, commercial size flock, we had to decide if we really were ready for that much debt. And we weren't, let's put it that way. But one of the key factors that worked into our decision of even pursuing solar grazing is that we are in the city limits of Ottawa. Now, if you looked around where we are, you probably wouldn't guess that. We are very rural. But if you look at the Ottawa city limits, they are huge. So the line ends just a couple miles from our farm, and we are technically City of Ottawa. We pay City of Ottawa taxes, but you'd never guess it. We're actually in a food desert. We are a full 20-minute drive from any grocery store. But what it does mean is in this area, though, we are still up against some, acreages. We're up against some long retired farmers that are just renting out their land and have no interest in selling. And land is pretty hard to come by, and I'd say not 10 kilometers away, the developments are going up. So they are coming closer and closer every year, and we are very much aware of the impact that that demand for land has on trying to even source hayland, to be honest. So in 2016, we did try the accelerated lambing thing, realized what it would take to make it work. In 2017, in the summer of 2017, we actually did contact the company that was just, we're lucky, they're 11 kilometers away. There is a solar site that has now been there for about 15 years. It was one of the first commercial solar sites in Ontario. It was the biggest at the time. It's 200 acres in size. And Chris had driven by it many, many times because he's lived here his whole life and always, sort of said they really need to put some sheep in there. And so, me being who I am, decided, well, I'm going to ask them. And so I quite literally Googled the company that was running it and found out who the right person was to call and put in an email and suggested a meeting, said this is what we're interested in. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but the company that we deal with had actually just started solar grazing with another sheep farmer about 6 hours from here with a bit of a different setup. It was a brand new site that was being built, and it was the sheep farmer's land, and they were leasing it to the solar company, and the farmer wanted to maintain grazing. And so it was a little bit of a different setup, but we weren't technically breaking entirely new ground here. So in 2017, in the fall, we did a pilot project at that site with about 50 ewes and a ram because we were doing some breeding groups, and it went really well. And so in 2018, we started our first full season. We moved the ewes in early May, and we actually lambed there beginning in May. And yeah, and now we're on our fifth. So it's important to note, and we've certainly had many conversations, many questions that have come in from Alberta, from other parts of Ontario, all sorts of things that are really jazzed up about this idea of free grass. And it's really important to note that it's not free grazing in that, and as we'll get into in a bit, it's actually quite labor intensive and requires a different kind of management in that you are providing a service. You have to wear two hats. And the important one is you are getting paid to graze it, but that comes with an expectation of performance. And so it's really important to recognize that while this is, yes, an amazing way that we've accessed 200 acres and now actually another 200, but 200 acres originally of grazing that we could turn our entire flock out to, we could build our flock, we could increase our numbers. It comes with a certain level of expectation. So what you're looking at there, it also, and we'll talk about this in a moment as well, it also does require some capital investment in that any site that's, let's say, larger than 5 acres to 10 acres requires moving animals, usually with net fencing, or you might use reels, but you also have to, of course, be able to sort, you have to be able to load out. So unloading animals is easy, as everybody knows. It's loading them that's maybe a bit more challenging. So we did invest in a Vino. That's what you're looking at here. Pratley is probably best known for their mobile yards here in Ontario anyway, but this is the Vino. This is a unit out of the Netherlands that we use, and it has been an amazing investment. All right, so we did sit down with the company. We did say, all right, this is what we want to do. We took on the grazing or the vegetation abatement contract of the entire site in that first year, 2018. We did buy a flock of sheep to add to our flock and to get our numbers up. It's still, in that first year, was not enough. We have kind of the opposite problem on our site that many sites have, and that is that because this was one of the first solar sites ever built, it was built on actually pretty good land. They're not allowed to be built on land that good anymore. And so we actually have almost too much growth. And so we had a challenge in keeping ahead of the growth. And we actually ended up baling off essentially a second cut, if you will, to try and keep ahead of the vegetation. So there is a standard, there's a safety standard when on site. So ourselves and any staff have to be trained to the solar company standard. We do have to wear hard hats, steel-toe boots, eye protection while in the site. And we do have to carry, of course, extra insurance. And most importantly, we have to make sure that we are keeping access to the inverter stations in different parts of the farm free and clear at all times. And we have to make sure that we are doing a really good job of getting underneath those panels and clearing off that leading edge. And that was really the problem we were solving for them, was in this site, especially with so much growth, the leading edge of the panel would get shaded by plants, of course, but also it was the grapevines, raspberry canes, Manitoba maples, things that would escape the mower, because the mower can only go so far underneath without hitting poles or damaging the panels. And so the sheep actually congregate under the panels. They love being under there, and they do a fantastic job clearing out underneath. So one of the reasons, or one of the things that people have to be prepared for, is every style is a little bit different. So there are quite a few solar grazing sites in the US now. It's definitely catching on very quickly, but there are also some very large sites. So there's a mix really of what they call community solar of 5, 10, 20 acres, all the way up to 1,000-acre, 2,000-acre solar sites in the US. And what's really fabulous to see is that many of the companies that are building these sites are actually working with the American Solar Grazing Association, with producers, to try and actually design the sites with grazing in mind. So this site was not built with grazing in mind. It does have a perimeter fence. It is not coyote proof. We have to use solar power to power our fence, which we'll get to in a minute, which is ironic that we don't have power in a power plant, but it's true. And it's labor intensive because we have a lot of growth. We have to cross fence, and we have to concentrate the sheep where they need to be to do the best job. And that means taking down fences, putting up fences. It means mobile watering. It means moving the cart that has all that on it, and that has to get done. And then, of course, parasites are always a concern, and so we need to be making sure that we're moving our sheep at a pretty good clip so that we are managing our parasite loads as well. So on the right there, that is a sheep doing what a sheep does best. Don't worry, she's not stuck. She was just trying to get the dog food. But solar sites have definitely had their critics, and Chris and I will be one of the first to admit that we both did not like solar, or the idea of solar taking over what we considered farmland, which most of them are on at least grazing land. Some that we've since toured are very much on rock, and are not taking the place of where you could potentially be growing a crop. But we like to think that now that we've seen what we can do with sheep, and we've seen what other people are doing with grazing, really this land can still be farmed. It's just farmed differently. And realistically, we can do a lot of really great things using sheep instead of equipment to mow these sites and to maintain these sites. So there really is a huge benefit to the solar sites as well because of that PR angle. So our setup and just solar grazing in general has changed a lot of people's minds about the idea of a solar site being sited near to them. People much prefer to see livestock still in it. They want to know that, you know, plants are growing, that plants are flowering year round. We have bees on site, and this is the adoption of solar grazing. Yes, helps sheep farmers quite a bit, but it also has helped the solar companies to win some of these PR battles, because certainly there are a lot of people that fight seeing some of these sites go in. And I am very okay with them being challenged. I think that it's really important that they be sited in smart places. But we know of even dairies in Minnesota. There is a dairy that has put in solar, and they just put the panels higher so the cattle could go underneath, and they're getting amazing production because the cattle are not as heat stressed because they have shade. So there's all sorts of amazing ways that we can have this dual use, or even, you know, triple use, really, if you add in bees and all sorts of other things, or if you count the wool. So it really is a win-win for everyone, and that people are coming around to it, but it's definitely a PR battle for sure. All right. many of you, of course, in speaking with Alberta producers, which is always lovely. I'm from Manitoba originally, so feel a kinship with the prairie folk. But I'm sure each of you, if you have sheep, you have dealt with predators at some point, and so we could not do what we do here at home on our 100 acres. We do, and I'll talk about wintering. We winter our ewes at home. Um, there is no way that we could do what we do without our herding dogs and without our livestock guardian dogs. Our coyote pressure is incredibly high. We know we have coyotes in the site. Yes, there's a perimeter fence. There are holes dug under it on every side. And if there isn't one, they'll just make one. 2 winters ago, or like 2 falls ago, so the ewes usually come out first week in November-ish. And 2 years ago, Chris had we had taken all the ewes home. He had gone back just to pack up the last of the stuff. And there were just coyote tracks everywhere. So all it takes is our dogs not being on site and you will see those coyotes all the time. So we try to run 2 dogs per paddock, and the paddocks can be 100 ewes, they could be 300 ewes. It all depends on where we're at in the cycle, and where we're at in the site. But we've always got young ones coming up. We've always got older ones sort of retiring, and we certainly know when the balance gets out of whack, which does happen sometimes. This year we had a couple of our old timers die, and we really noticed right away a big difference in not having that many adult dogs. So it's definitely important. I do know one solar grazer here in Ontario that does have llamas and chooses to use llamas. And they are now, I think, on their 2nd or 3rd year solar grazing, so it must be working. But we've had the best results with dogs, and that's our commitment with the livestock guardian dogs. That and llamas terrify me, so there's that too. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's without issues, as anyone who runs dogs knows. Of course, you have to feed them, so they need to be fed. We also farm in the public eye, realistically, and we did have an incident where last year, so our second site that we graze is an hour and 15 minutes away. It is split into 2 100-acre paddocks that are fully fenced, and they're about 10 minutes away from each other. And at the one that is more remote, we did actually have someone who cut the fence to take our dog out. Now, most of you will probably know right away that most guardian dogs would never let anyone lure them. But standing next to my daughter, he was with a lot of kids on a very busy sort of hobby farm. We rehomed him. He is a really great dog, but he's almost too friendly, and so he was the one that was on site. We did have to go through the police to get him back. We did get him back, but we learned a lot from that. We learned a lot about signage. We learned a lot about talking to our community neighbors in the area. We learned a lot about just communicating ahead of time about what our dogs are doing and how they're cared for, and how they're checked on and all those sorts of things, because there certainly there were questions about that. And yeah, so we've got cameras up and all those sorts of things, but that doesn't seem to stop people when they want to do some things. So if anybody wants to talk about trespass bills or anything like that, you let me know. We've had quite an experience. Okay, so one of the things we are absolutely passionate about is taking care of our soil, taking care of our land, and taking care of the land that all the critters that share it. So pollinators, native species, monarchs, all of them are welcome on this site, and all of them thrive. And this is one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions about solar, is that nothing grows under the panels, or that it's a dead zone, that it's just a sea of glass. In that, I would say our site, especially now that it's been so many years under grazing, for one thing, because we don't mow it all at once, that means there's always part of the site that has more mature plants that are blooming. So there's lots for bees and native pollinators. There's tons of milkweed. We see tons of monarchs. Chris just caught a praying mantis this week. The globe weaver, the orb weaver spiders are everywhere and get tangled in your helmet all the time. And I try to remember how beautiful they are when they're in my face. We can provide a pretty amazing habitat within these spaces, all just with what we're already doing. And it's just an added benefit that it works really well for all the species that already live there. So this picture is from 2018, I want to say, because the ewes are not sheared, I see. We have moved our shearing to earlier in the year. We did shear on site for the first 3 years. Which I'm glad to take your questions about the practicality of some of these things. But this particular patch that we're looking at, I just drove by it today, and I would say the clovers and the legumes have probably tripled from this picture. So it's pretty amazing to see the difference in the site year over year, and the longer we're there, the change in some of the species is pretty cool. And there is one of our ewes. So that's an old Trop ewe. And that is a bird's nest made with the wool that they picked up at the solar. And we find that that's not super common, but it's not the only one we found. There are birds that love to live there and make their nests, and so we thought it was pretty cool. You'll also probably note, yes, their wool looks like crap, and that is because we also have burdock, and so we do deal with burdock in the site, and that is a long-term challenge that we are trying to deal with in several blocks of that one. Anyway, this entire undertaking has not been easy. We grew very quickly to meet this opportunity. That particular ewe, that Schropp ewe, we bought. So we bought sheep when we originally said yes to the 2018 year. Then we bought sheep in late 2019 because we financially could float it to expand our numbers faster, and there was somebody retiring, so that's where the Schropp ewes came from. And then we actually last year, when we took on the second site, we bought another flock out of Manitoba, and that has been the sheep wintered beautifully. We could do a whole presentation on grazing, late fall grazing. We actually grazed them. They didn't get stored feed until January. They wintered beautifully. We had great conception rates. They were wonderful at lambing, and then we moved them to the new site and everything fell apart. If anyone has ever dealt with ergot in a grazing flock, it is not a lot of fun. I didn't even know you could have fly strike. We have got a hold of, touch wood. We're much better at managing the conditions that create fly strike hotspots. Coxie, however, is still an issue, especially when we wean ram lambs and bring them home. So we don't castrate ram lambs. We actually do very little with our sheep at birth. And so we do try to move our ram lambs out when they're between 80 and 90 days. And depending on where they go, those lambs we seem to get behind the 8 ball on Coxie when we're doing that. So we are still dealing with that. So expanding quickly has its challenges. Managing people, we have had phenomenal staff. We have had very challenging staff. We've had a couple disasters. We had a quad catch fire last year. A couple not so great things. And there's been a lot of stress, really, honestly, about trying to float all this. And we have 3 kids. I work full time. So it's a lot, and it has been a lot, but it has also been a magnificent sort of foray into scaling up and actually getting to a commercial size. And the solar grazing industry as a whole has been phenomenal. There are some really wonderful people in it. And this is a picture of those ewes that came from Manitoba. They arrived in mid-August of last year to the One Solar site. This photo was taken in early November. And those are tillage radish. And so anyone who knows anything about compaction can probably tell that there's a hard pan just underneath. But these ewes from the solar grazing early November moved onto 50 some acres of cover crops. We cross-fenced them and we moved across it and then onto another 15 acres and then moved them back to be fed hay starting on January 13th of this year. So it was a really extending the grazing season is a huge benefit and a focus for us. And solar grazing has sort of given us the confidence to continue trying to graze as far into the winter as we can. So we use stockpiled grazing, we use cover crop grazing, and then we unroll our bales. So we don't do bale grazing. We have tried that with sheep. You really need some cows in the mix to make it really work. And we can debate that, but anyone, I don't know, we need to have cows in the mix to make it work here. But we do unroll our bales, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so here's a couple pictures just to, so top left, we do graze crop aftermath. So that's corn, grain corn aftermath. So those are our homebred ewes, what we call our homebred ewes. That is late November, early December. Usually we have more snow than that, everybody. So I know some of you, I'm sure in parts of Alberta, that's not strange, but I'm from Manitoba. Not having snow in early December is weird to me. But don't worry, we got lots after that, but the sheep will eat through it, so it's fine. And they eat snow. A dry ewe eats snow for water just fine. We actually put out water for them and they won't drink it. They eat snow. So the bottom left, that was actually removing the ewe lambs off cover crop grazing to bring them home. And so that's the Vino set up there to load onto the trailer. So if you look bottom right, that's when the ewe lambs first arrived at that site. That's how much cover crop growth there was from mid-August. So that they went in, I guess that's early October. And so this has become one of the key things we wanted to do was get our ewe lambs to breed the first year, and we knew we needed to put some size on them, and that means feed. And so our strategy is to move our ewe lamb or keep our ewe lambs on their mums, basically to the end of the grazing season at the solar, so we don't wean our ewe lambs really at all. And then we put them onto cover crops, and they grow like gangbusters because it's rocket fuel. That is also right next to that is a picture of our setup at the cover crops. So we use our solar panel, our solar energizers. We use the water totes for water. Grounds are everything. And that's just one of our setups. We repurpose carts. We've got an old manure spreader we use. We've got that particular one we moved with a tractor, but we have other ones that are on wheels. We roll them around. And then the top right, that is some of our ewe flock in winter. So we have a bale unroller on the back of our tractor, and it is a fantastic way to feed 400 ewes in a very short amount of time, and lots of bunk space. Everybody's got lots of room. We do have a grain snacker that we will use for our ewe lambs over the winter or in very cold conditions. But that we realized very quickly, that was one of the lessons we learned early on. You can't take care of 600 ewes like you take care of 50. Feeding 600 ewes is not feeding 100 ewes 6 times, not in the way we do things. So we definitely had to adjust basically our entire production system to scale up the way we did. And we try and keep things pretty simple. Okay, so there's Chris, if anybody doesn't know him. One of the, can everyone see my screen okay? This popped up and I don't know why. But here, I'll just move this out of the way. One of the key aspects, of course, is that we are still a lamb provider. So while solar grazing is an income stream, it is not the only income stream. We still are a lamb producer. And so we have tried to and have successfully moved away from being, really just running everything through the livestock barns, the auction barns, and moving more to direct sales. That, of course, has its own challenges. It's nice to have a bit more control on the steadiness of what we get paid, but the liquidity of the auction barn really can't be understated. It's pretty amazing. And we're lucky to have 2 within about an hour from us, so that's nice. But we, of course, live in a city of 1 million people. And so I do go to a farmer's market. Friends of ours started one, and so I support them in that, and that has been a wonderful way to meet our customers. We do sell to a couple restaurants, a couple butcher shops, and we do whole and half lamb orders through the winter. And it has been lovely. It has been successful, but it is definitely it's time intensive, and of course time is the one thing we probably don't have any extra of. So that we have been deciding kind of all the different ways we're going to do things. Oh, someone is writing on the screen and I don't even know how that's possible. Okay. 2 things people always ask about winter feeding. So I've covered some of that, but I'm more than happy to go over more of it. And then people always also ask about wool. And so the value for us in wool very much is on the animal's back. So we actually have quite a bit of Romanov in some of our ewes, so our wool is not the greatest quality. But we also have some sheep with some really lovely wool. We have sold wool to a blanket maker here in Canada, and we were selective in what we sent to them, and it passed muster. It was, of course, free of burrs. It was from specific breeds or types of our ewes, and we were very selective on what we sent them. And that was probably the best money we made on our wool. We did just this last round on those Manitoba ewes. We did send that to the wool growers. We are lucky. We're actually only about 30 minutes from Carleton Place, which is the wool growers head office. And it is super cool if you ever get to go tour it. So we get to go and drop off our wool directly at that depot. But realistically, the best value we get out of that wool is the fact that our ewes winter outside completely. And we do have, as you can see in the background there, we do have quite a few, we have trees, we have valleys, we have rock cuts, we have all sorts of, we call it our living barn. They have shelter. We feed them well. When there's a big storm coming, we tip bales into the woods. We have trails all through the woods that we can unroll on. They are well sheltered. Even in the -30 temps, they do just fine because they're in full wool. So I think we are huge fans of wool. I think wool is amazing. I think that wool is set for a renaissance, and there's some really neat things that we're going to do with wool in the years coming. And so we want to improve our wool. We want to get ahead of the burr problem, but we're also realistic. And so we have composted an entire year's worth of wool, and you know what? It composts really well. And that still goes back onto our fields and grows pasture and hay. So it is not wasted by any stretch. It does get used. So there is that. I've run through this relatively quickly, although I think we're okay for time. But I will say one of the things that is a challenge is the genetic side. We here in Ontario don't have a ton of grassy genetics. There are some very large grass-based flocks in Ontario, but they are not the norm. And so trying to find rams that fit our system, because we lamb on grass, we want, you know, vigorous, smart lambs that get up and suck. We want mothers that lamb easily unassisted and love their babies. We need mamas that can count to 2 so that they don't leave one behind when we move paddocks when they're only, you know, 48 hours old. And so we want our sheep to work for us, and that takes selection and that takes culling. But of course, the rams make a huge impact. And so the 2 that are there are 2 of our favorites. They actually came from Alberta. They are registered Canadian Arcots, and we really love the Canadian breed. It's been really good for us, but oddly enough, the Western version. So as much as they're all the same breed, they definitely have developed in 2 different lines, and Eastern Canadian Arcots are very different. So we did have one sire that we kept many of his daughters, and he did really well for us, but we really like the Western lines. And we've got a whole bunch of different ones out there. And one of our other successful moves that we made in the last 2 years was we got some border Cheviot rams just for our ewe lambs, and that has been a brilliant move. Those babies come out reaching for the teat, I swear, and they're lively, and they're nice, tidy little lambs that the ewe lambs can take great care of. So it has worked out really well, but we've had to think it through and try a few different things and figure it out. So with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing, although at any time, if anybody wants me to go back to any screen, any particular image or anything like that, we can do that. But I will stop sharing. There we go. I'll turn my light back on so you can see me. Hang on a moment, because it's very warm. And Jennifer, yes, wool is not only for yarn, 100%. Oh my goodness. So we have some wonderful people here in Ontario that are doing some great things with wool. But I really we really need to be using wool in so many places that we're using plastic or plastic derivatives right now. And so I really hope we see more commercial uses for wool. I hope that we can see things like insulation and those sorts of things. I know in the US they allow it, they don't in Canada. And so we are like huge proponents for Canadian made, and let's find as many uses as possible because, oh my goodness. And hey, yes, yarn is also great. Wool clothing is wonderful, but there's so much more we can do with wool. And we will gladly support that in any way we can. So I will open it up. If people are more, if they want to ask on chat, by all means, please put your questions in chat. And if you would prefer to unmute and ask, by all means. And if everybody just wants to go have supper, I think that's cool too. Ashley has my contact info. I put it up there on the screen, so by all means. But I will say, here's how I will end the formal presentation. What are your questions?
Did you find it easy to get into the solar farm? We're trying to get into some like tree farms in our area, and we're having a little bit of pushback from the mill, not necessarily seeing the benefits of it. So, like, do you have any tips on how you even got a face-to-face meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it can be, depending on the company, it can be difficult. You do have to sort of figure out who the right person is, figure out your pitch. Think about it from the perspective of what problem do you solve for them? And if you can lead with, here's the problem I solve, you are perhaps more likely to get in the door. Now, we were lucky in that the company was already sort of coming around to this, and at least for solar grazing, I don't want to say all the solar companies know about this and are totally on board, but it is definitely becoming more known. We have many more years under our belt collectively, and so we can connect. Like, we've actually had people who say, like, can I connect your solar company with my solar company that I want to work with so they can talk? More of that happens. So I don't know how much of that has happened in say the woodlot side of things, but really it comes down to, you have to solve a problem. So for us, we know that we are slightly less cost to them as far as versus a commercial mower. We price ourselves sort of, 85% of that. So that's going to differ depending on your area. And so we save them some money, but mostly we create a PR win for them and all sorts of other sort of side benefits. So if you can lead with the problem that you solve, and then hopefully you're talking to the right person, or being, not being annoying, but at least being persistent at trying to figure out who that right person is. We met virtually at first, and this was long before COVID, but we did like a Zoom like this with a couple of the players involved, and so I sort of went through my pitch in a way we went. So but focus on, and even practice it, like focus on what do you solve for them, how do you phrase that, and try going from there, because all of these companies, at least for solar, vegetation abatement is one of their biggest ongoing costs. So for them, they're always looking for ways that they can either make it more affordable or more effective or all those sorts of things. So this is a problem for them, and we're solving a problem for them. So that, if that helps, and any follow-up, and email me if you want. I work with words a lot. Any help, for sure. I don't know if that answers your question, Melanie.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay, so Jennifer is in the barn, but she has questions. Okay, so how many sheep per acre kind of watering system? So I showed our watering system. It's all gravity fed. We are lucky that on 2 of our 3 sites, we have running water. So we fill totes and then we wheel the water to the sheep. On our 4th site, we have to store it. So we actually have to have a pumper truck come in and store it, but it's all gravity fed from there. Sheep per acre totally changes based on growing conditions and really growing conditions and time of year. So it all depends on, is this second pass or third pass? Is this the one and only? Is this, have you had good growing conditions? But we run under the premise of we need enough sheep per paddock that we mow down a third, trample a third, and leave a third. So it is part science and it is part art. And especially once the ewes have lambed and the lambs are starting to eat, paddock size changes. So, or moves are more frequent. But we honestly move our sheep almost every single day. Or there's always a group that's moving every single day. We never leave them in the same place more than 3 days. Because day one, they're eating at the dinner table. Day two, they're eating in the living room. And day three, they're eating out of the toilet. So that's sort of the rule we go by. And we are constantly moving them because we're running at high stocking densities. So we want to, like, a lot of the job that our sheep do is because they're trampling. So we're actually covering the soil, we're keeping dust down, but we're smashing down the plants that could grow in front of that panel and shade it. So we have really high stocking densities, and we like it that way. We want them to like take a couple mouthfuls over a day and then we move on. So extra fencing, we provide all of our, we do tie off the main fence. So when we are on the outside rounds, the paddocks are bigger. So those might be 2-day paddocks, 3-day paddocks, because we use Premier One net fencing, single spike, use a dead blow hammer, don't get the double spike. And we use the shorter fence because I'm not that tall and I hate getting shocked. And it works just fine. Energizer, by the biggest one you can afford. And then maybe save up for the bigger one. So more power is always better, and really good grounds. So grounds, of course, are everything. And so we are actually we ground on the racking of the solar panels. So we have really amazing grounds. So that, of course, makes a huge difference. And then safety measures with employees. So we do safety training every spring. And we have to wear hard hats, eye protection, and safety boots at all times, and long pants. Short sleeves are allowed. We have to know sort of where the muster point is. We have to know our way around the site. We have to sign in and sign out on the weekend. So we do it over group chat. But if the office is open, we used to have to do it in the office. COVID kind of changed that. We've gone completely to phone sign in, sign out. So they have to know who's on site at all times. We do have to do that for all of our staff, and we do have to get permission to bring anyone into the site. So the sites do love tours and those sorts of things. So dog safety. Dogs are interesting. We work very hard to keep our dogs in the paddock with the sheep. That doesn't always work. Some dogs love to get out. Some dogs definitely, if there's a coyote, they're going to jump that fence. We do use dangle chains to try and deter that. Really, we have small kids, so our dogs we want them to stay with their sheep and be standoffish that someone isn't going to take them, but we don't want them to be dangerous in any way. We use for our predation pressure, we do have some bears, but they tend to stay away. We use Marima, Great Pyrenees, Crackachan, a couple of those crosses. Honestly, the worst dog incidents that we've had have been with Chris. And so he did have one of our dogs turn on him and bit up his hands pretty bad. But for the most part, the employees don't really do anything with the dogs or the sheep. They are, however, some of our biggest cheerleaders. A couple of them weren't super keen. They don't love getting sheep poop on their boots if the sheep are on the roadway or something like that. But now, I mean, we've had some employees that actually will go and take their lunch and just watch the sheep. They'll alert us if somebody's out. They'll let us know if somebody doesn't look good, which actually hilariously was one time it was a lamb that was just born and they were like, it doesn't look good. You got to come see it. And it was just getting up. And we've had puppies there too. And of course they love the puppies. And so, our dogs get used to them. But we don't want them to be too used to them, but they should be in the fenced area. They shouldn't ever be out, but sometimes they are. I hope that answers all your questions. Those are great questions. Those are all things that we go through and maybe have changed our mind on some things as well. Are there other questions?
I was wondering, we're in talks with a solar company right now, and they haven't presented us with a contract yet, but is there anything I should try and make sure is in that contract to protect myself?
Yes. So, absolutely. And actually, I cannot stress enough joining ASGA. It's very, very low cost. That's the American Solar Grazing Association. They actually have sample contracts on the site once you're a member. And so it is really important to make sure that you outline the expectations of what you are providing and then what they provide. So you need things like if you're going to use dogs, it needs to be in your contract because there are sites that they don't allow dogs. And it's a disaster and they wish they could, but they can't because there's an endangered fox that lives in this one area and they don't want the guardian dogs taking them out. So things like having our dogs on site is written in. Perimeter fence, the perimeter fence is their responsibility and it's their responsibility to maintain, so that's in there. I highly recommend asking the company to give you exactly the wording that you need to take to your insurance to get the rider in place. It's not a super expensive add-on, but you need it to be exactly what the company wants. That's for their protection and for yours. But yes, so ASGA, it's solargrazing.org, I think is the website. And they have like all the webinars are archived for one thing, and they have some amazing ones. They have draft contracts on there to at least give you some guidelines. But honestly, I would probably recommend having a lawyer at least look over the contract, making sure that it's pretty clear on, damages and how you get out of the contract. So on both ends, and really it's really important just to make sure that you're covered. But it doesn't have to be onerous, but just think about those things for sure, especially with dogs. So, and yes, does that answer your question, Robin? Or
That's good, thanks.
yeah. So ours has in our contract, ours is a 3-year contract. We started with a 1 year to see how it went, and then we have a 3-year. So our contract spells out sort of what we're paid, how often, that we can have dogs on site, that we have access to water, that we and our staff have access to site 24/7, things like that. So, and then we have the specific language from them on our insurance and those sorts of things. So it's really important. And Jennifer just mentioned quickly in the chat, what about if work needs to be done in a grazing area? So for the most part, this is again where communication comes in. We don't fence off any of the inverter stations or anything like that. We always fence around them, which there's usually a good 4 feet of gravel around them anyway, so we fence around them. But if at any time the staff are going to be working in a certain area, we either will work around them or they'll just let us know and we can either be there to let them in and out, or honestly, they usually are really good about giving us a lot of notice about when they're going to be working in a certain area, and we can just move the sheep around. So it's not a huge issue. But communication is everything. Communication with the site manager, with the staff there, and with the landowners if they're involved as well. So that's a really key point. And as we learned, the community around it. So one of the stories I love to share is, so the site that we're in, that we have been, this is our 5th year, is very close to a town called Arnprior, and a lot of the people there, of course, remember when these were standalone farms, and it was 9 years before we got back into it, and there is a Facebook group that once people saw the sheep in there, people were so excited that there were sheep there again, and we actually now go on to Facebook when the sheep, especially when they have their young lambs, if they're approaching the outside fence, we actually post on the Facebook group to say, if you want to go see the solar sheep, head on over and go see them. And there is a side road, and then we've had people that come and just sit and park and watch the sheep graze for a little while. And so it's been a real win for the town too, in that people love seeing the animals back in there. So it's pretty cool. Any other questions?
Lindsay, I would love to know sort of where you can find these opportunities to solar graze, because where do you look? Or we live in the middle of nowhere, so
which is maybe where they will build the solar. You don't know.
I mean, you never know exactly.
Yeah.
But where do we find them?
So another great question. And again, realistically, Canada is a little further behind, and maybe the West a little bit more as far as the coordination of everybody sort of talking to each other. And so realistically, as more of this, as it becomes more the norm, as it becomes more popular, it will become easier to find the companies that are either bidding in your area or planning to build. I will put in another plug for ASGA. So ASGA has a map actually that you can add yourself to the map, and the service is offered, and then companies can actually add where they're going to build or where they have a site that they're looking for solar grazing. So they actually have built an app where you can actually like plunk yourself on and say, "Hi, I'm a sheep farmer and I would love to solar graze." So that helps, but it's a bit more American than Canadian. If there are sites going up near you, honestly, showing up there, usually there's some sort of signage, or you talk to the foreman or the contractor or whatever, and very friendly. Bring your business cards with you. Tell them who you are and what you want to do. And so there's a couple here. A good friend of ours that solar grazes not far, she came into it at our site and then went down. Like, she literally went up to the fence and like took a picture of the company name on the thing and then like Googled it and then like sort of went down the rabbit hole. So not ideal. I really hope we get to a point in Canada that we are as coordinated as they are in some of the states where we've got yeah, and wonderful, Ashley. I really hope that we will see some coordination in this from our producer groups and those sorts of things to actually sort of connect some of these, because I really do think as this becomes more popular, we're going to have a lot more companies that are open to this that are just as much going to want to try and find sheep farmers. So I really do think if we can all keep in touch and try and promote this, and Ashley, I'm glad to hear she said to email. I'm glad to hear there might be some coordination at a provincial level of those sorts of things, because it will help a lot. Even just if you do have a company that's going up in your area, if they have questions, you can connect them to other people as well to sort of make the whole thing work. Okay, my 5-year-old has decided this is done. Just kidding. Anyway, great question, Emily, and I hope Ashley can help you, and I hope that we see more of it going forward as well, as far as coordination goes. Are there more questions? This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for all your great questions.
Just to let you know, Jennifer just saw the email through the chat box. When I send an email out tomorrow morning that has a link to where you can access the recording, Lindsay, if you don't mind, I'll also include your email address.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And just something else to let the other participants know on this call, I was chatting with Lindsay a bit before we started, is here in Alberta, we did receive funding to do the sheep and goat vegetation management accreditation program. And so that's where we're looking to do the accreditation program, to look at, there's a module in there for unique grazing, for example, that's going to be focused on grazing cut blocks, forestry, we've got solar grazing in there. Those are some just off the top of my head, and there's case studies and FAQs. So we do recognize that this is an important aspect, and we want to make sure that we're setting our producers up for success by having some of this material readily available for them to help them through the process.
Fantastic.
Are there any other questions for Lindsay? All right, well, I don't see any more coming through, Lindsay. So I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening and doing this presentation for our producers and those participants. This does conclude the webinar. Again, I will be sending an email out to everyone who registered for this evening's session that will include a link to where you can access the webinar and some email addresses.
Fantastic. All right, thanks everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, Lindsay.